Hi everyone, how are you guys doing today? I hope that you are okay. Today we'll be having semicolons, colons, and commas. First, log in using the aplusstudent.com, and then you click on your name, go to language arts, and move on to grade 7. Semicolons, colons, and commas. So we'll start with the first lesson, which says use semicolons and commas to separate clauses. Alright, first let's understand how we can use the commas. Okay, so use a comma to separate two independent clauses that are joined with a coordinating conjunction such as and or but or so. So when you have independent clauses, you use a comma to separate them. If we say independent clause, we mean that clauses that could stand on their own without any other addition. So it's like the sentence already makes sense when we have independent clauses. So it is joined by a coordinating conjunction, so you have to use comma to separate them. So the comma comes before the coordinating conjunction. However, if the coordinating conjunction joins verb or verb phrases in a compound predicate, a comma should not be used. So if it's joining verbs or verb phrases in the compound predicate, then you do not have to use a comma. So just like here, we have what was reserved around new people, then there's a comma, but he was hardly shy. Now this is the coordinating conjunction with a comma. Okay, and then the second one says what was reserved around new people but was hardly shy. So now the difference is that it doesn't have a pronoun he, so it is coordinating the verb. Okay, it's joining both verbs together. So now you do not need to add. So like it said, if it's coordinating the verbs or verb phrases in a compound predicate, do not join or add comma. Okay, you just put your coordinating conjunction. Now also use a comma to separate a dependent clause and an independent clause. So dependent clause, they need support, they cannot stand on their own. So they're not complete. Like I've said, independent clause are complete, they do not need any support. So you use comma to separate dependent clause and independent clause when the dependent clause comes first. So if the dependent clause comes first, you have to put a comma in between them. These dependent clauses usually start with a subordinating conjunction. So now the dependent clauses have subordinating conjunction, and you would see it in the sentence. So for example, you have after, although, or because starting the sentence. You know that it's starting the sentence because that is a dependent clause. So once you see after or because, although at the beginning of the sentence, that is a dependent clause. So you have to separate the dependent from the independent. Just like here, we have although what was reserved around new people, he was hardly shy. So although started the sentence telling us that it is a dependent clause starting the sentence. So we have to add a comma to separate the dependent clause from the independent clause. Use a semicolon to connect two closely related independent clauses that are joined with coordinating conjunction. Take note, use a semicolon to connect two closely related independent clauses. Two closely related independent clauses that are not joined with a coordinating conjunction. So let's say we have independent clauses, two of them, but you cannot see the coordinating conjunction, that is the and or but, so you do not see it. Then you have to use the semicolon to coordinate them. Okay, so we have what was highly shy, and we have a semicolon here. He was simply reserved around new people. So if we had a coordinating conjunction, either and, but, or so, we would not need the semicolon. But because we do not have that, of course, we need the semicolon. Also use a semicolon to connect two independent clauses that are joined with a conjunctive adverb such as consequently, however, or therefore. So if you have two independent clauses that are joined with a conjunctive adverb such as however, therefore, then you need to put a semicolon. Just like what was hardly shy, then we have a semicolon here. Nevertheless, he was reserved around new people. So these are the rules for using semicolons, colons, or even commas. Okay? Dependent clause, although Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a sometime controversial leader, comes before the independent clause. So you should complete the sentence with a comma. So this is from the question up above. So let's go there and check. So, although Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a sometimes controversial leader, he is the only American president to have been elected to office for four times. Okay, so we have to check the sentence. It says add a comma or semicolon if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. So, it says here that you have to put a comma because it started with a dependent clause, like we've said. So since it starts with a dependent clause, you have to put a comma. Okay? You should complete it with a comma. Last night last night's rain left the three-line trail in the park wet and muddy. Nevertheless, I enjoyed the fresh clean air on my morning jog. So last night's rain left the line trail in the park wet and muddy. So remember that we have the conjunctive adverb nevertheless. So before that, you need to add your semicolon. So that's what you do. You add your semicolon before you have nevertheless, therefore, however, all those conjunctive adverbs. So let's move on to the test and do some questions together. All right, so we have add a comma or semicolon if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. Okay, so groundwater comes from underground reservoirs called aquifers, and we rely on this source to meet half of our water needs in the United States. Okay, so it says that groundwater comes from underground reservoirs called aquifers, and we rely on these sources to meet half of our water needs in the United States. So, this is a coordinating conjunction and here. So, it is connecting the two independent clauses. Okay, so you need to have a comma before that. Okay, a comma comes before the coordinating conjunctions. Wild Leak is a whistleblower website where people anonymously report illegal wildlife trade. The site may prove effective in the fight against wildlife crime. However, it requires internet access in order to be useful. So it says to add a comma or semicolon if needed, otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. Now, we have to look at this sentence carefully, and we have a conjunctive adverb here where it says crime, however. So take note that we usually have a semicolon before a conjunctive adverb. So if you have in however, then you should have a conjunctive um, adverb, which that is the however. So you need to have a semicolon first, not a comma. Look at the second one. The second one has a comma before the however. So let's say we click on the second one. It is wrong, okay? Because like I have said, we have a semicolon first. But if you click on the second one and you get it wrong, just scroll down and you will read why you got it wrong. Okay, you will have an explanation as to why it was wrong so that you can know better. So you don't need to start all over again, just continue. Okay, but take notes that we need to have a semicolon before the conjunctive adverbs. Shrek, a New Zealander sheep, went 6 years without being shorn, so his fleece weighed 60 pounds when it was finally caught. Now, we have so here, which is a coordinating conjunction. So we have to put a comma before so. All right, do not just put so coordinating conjunctions without the commas. It makes your sentence incomplete. Okay, so you need to have the comma. Airplane food has a reputation for being unappetizing, but the food itself may not be responsible. Researchers have discovered that high altitude and decreased humidity due our ability to detect flavors. Okay, so because of the high altitude and the decreased humidity, it dulls our ability to detect flavors. All right, so we have to check. We have bots here and there's a space. So that means there's something missing here. But is the coordinating conjunction. So you need to have a comma there. So you have to pick the one that has a comma. Okay? Before Miss Rivera saw the Beetroot National Forest, she had no idea how stunning the landscape is in Indao. So, what is supposed to be here? There's a space here, so we need to have a punctuation. So is it a semicolon or is it a comma? So let's go with a semicolon. Now, if you click on the semicolon, it is wrong. Why? Because it is a dependent clause first. So if you remember what I said, before is a dependent clause. So once you have before starting the sentence, you know that it's a dependent clause and you put commas in between dependent clauses and maybe independent clause. Okay, so you have to put a comma, not a semicolon. So if you click on semicolon and it's wrong and you're wondering, oh, why, just scroll down and you can have more explanation as to why it was wrong. Scientists believe tornadoes form due to high relative humidity and significant wind changes in the lowest region of the atmosphere. Furthermore, tornadoes only form if downward drafts are present in just the right part of the storm. Now we have furthermore a conjunctive adverb over here. What do we have here? What is supposed to be here? Of course, we know that we are supposed to have our semicolon. Okay? So you have your semicolon if you have furthermore there, however, nevertheless, all the conjunctive adverbs. Okay, so we will click on the one with the semicolon. As Richard chopped the cilantro for the chili, I shredded the cheese for the quinceañeras. Now, what is supposed to be here? As is starting the sentence. Is as a is as necessary? Is it used for the dependent clause? Of course, you have as, so it's the subordinating conjunctions. So you need to have your comma. It's a subordinating conjunction. Okay. The department store does not grant refunds after 60 days. However, items may still be returned for store credit. However, we have conjunctive adverb, so we will put our semicolon in between days and however. Since the Maya of Central American began eating a Western diet high in sugar in the 1950s, their rate of diabetes has surged. Since now is what? A subordinating conjunction. So that means it's starting with a dependent clause, and we need to put a comma to connect the dependent and the independent. All right, so that's it for this first lesson, separating the clauses, understanding how to use the comma, semicolons, and all of them. I hope that you understand this. Okay, so please make sure that you complete this lesson. If you've not done this, complete this lesson, and let's move on to the next lesson. Use semicolons, colons, and commas with lists. So we're using this one with list. Use colon to introduce a list after an independent clause. So, how do you use columns? Introducing the list after an independent clause. If a list does not follow an independent clause, do not use punctuation to introduce the list. So, if the list does not follow an independent clause, do not use any punctuation. My parents have visited much of Western Europe. That is an independent clause, so you have to put your colon to introduce your list, just like this here. Okay? You have to put your colon to introduce this list here. Now, my parents have visited much of Western Europe, including Austria and the rest of them. Now, it says that if it does not follow an independent clause, do not punctuate. So it has including already. So it's not following an independent clause. All right, so you do not have to put your column. Use commas to separate three or more items in a sentence. Put a comma after each item in the list except for the last one. So you use commas to separate three or more items in a series. Put a comma after each item except the last. So let's say our speaker will be Kelvin. We have Rachel as well and Linda. Okay, so we have a series, right? So you have to put the comma in the first, the second, but you do not put in the last. Okay, so Rachel is the second, but we do not put any comma for the last series. You use semicolon to separate items in a series when using commas would be unclear. So if you know that you would use comma and it will be unclear, that's where you go with your semicolon. Such as when one or more items in the series already contain comma. So if the sentence already has a comma and it will probably get you confused, just kindly use a semicolon. Do not get yourself even more confused. Our speaker will be Kelvin, an English professor, Rachel Steen, a print journalist. So As it is now, after the name of the person with what they are doing or their profession, you put your semicolon. After the name, semicolon. After the name, semicolon. That's how it goes. But you do not put anything in the last one. There's a list introduced by an independent clause, so you should complete the sentence with a colon. Okay, so this is the pattern. So let's look at some questions. Chicago, Illinois has been home to several notable American writers: Sandra, Gwendolyn, Ford, Scott, Carl, and Shaw. Now you check if that is correct. Was it inserted properly? So you need to put a semicolon before you put a colon before the names of the writers. Inspired by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1941 Four Freedom State of the Union Address, painter Norman Rockwell painted four paintings: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. So you have to take a look at it and make sure that it is arranged in the nicest order and the right order. Okay. So take note that before your series, you always have to put a column before all your series. Okay, so let's move on to your test. If you know the answers, please try to send in your answers on the chat. It's good if you cooperate as well. Add commas, semicolons, or colons if needed. Otherwise, submit the text without any additional punctuation. Some of history's most famous spies include Francis, who spied for Queen Elizabeth, I. Nathan Hale, who spied during the Revolutionary War, and Bell, who gathered intelligence during the Civil War. So, for all this, it already has lots of commas, but you still have to be able to differentiate them. So, after each person's name and what they did, after the person's name, you put a comma, and after what they did, you put a semicolon to be able to separate them. So the best answer is the first one. An unrelenting drought in California has drained lakes, rivers, and snowpacks, so the state now relies on groundwater to meet demand. Now, what should we add here? It's in a series, so you have to make sure that you put your commas, but it's already in a series. So you have to check the correct one. Remember that you do not put comma after the last one. So this second one is wrong because you always have to put your comma before and. Okay, so this is wrong. So commas always come before coordinating conjunctions like and, but, also. According to data from 2011 and earlier, some 20 to 32% of wild caught seafood imported into the United States was from unrelated, illegal, and unreported pirate fishing sources. So you have to check and make sure that it's in the right order. Okay. So we have to look at this and see if there's a mistake. So looking at this, you can see that they put a comma after and that is incorrect. Your comma needs to always come before your coordinating conjunction, which is and, but, also, any of the above. So we will click on the first one. But should in case you click on the wrong one, just scroll down and get the explanation and see the reason why it was wrong. You don't have to start from the beginning, just continue where you left off. So, if you love literature, you would likely enjoy visiting Shakespeare and Company, a bookshop in Paris, Francis Leo Estate in Russia, and Henry David Cabin at Welding Pond in Concord. Okay, now we have to check. This is supposed to have commas and semicolons because every name has a different thing that you need to take note of. So let's have a look and see the right one. Okay, so it should be this one. The first is the correct one. Okay. All right. So inspired by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1941 For Freedom State of the Union Address, painter Norma painted four paintings: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. So you have to make sure, yes, you need to put a column to separate them, but this one is wrong because you can see the column in between freedom of speech, but that is one together, so you shouldn't separate that. It should be the second one. So that is it for semicolons, colons, and commas. You can let me know on the chat if you have any questions, and I will answer your questions. You can send in your questions if you have any before we finish. Make sure to complete this lesson if you haven't yet. Complete the lesson if you're yet to complete it. And then I will see you guys in my next class or in our next lesson. Okay, have a good night and bye everyone.